Welcome everybody to our third day of senior capstones for the computer science department at Carthage College 2019. How about a hand for yourselves? Okay. First up is Jordan Keller. And I cede the mic. I cede everything. You can have it all.
Alrighty.
Okay, take it away.
As you guys heard, my name is Jordan Keller, and this is my senior capstone. Now, picture this scenario, right? You go to the grocery store. You're looking at all these different ingredients, and in that very moment, all these ingredients seem like good things to have, right? You don't know if you're going to end up using all of them, but you decide, why not just get a little bit of everything, right? So then, of course, 1 week goes by, maybe more than 1 week, 2 weeks even, and then all of a sudden you have all these different ingredients, and they're about to expire. You've never used them at all, and you don't know what to use them with. Well, if this scenario has ever happened to you before, then you were in the exact same boat as my good friend Emily Conway. And she came up with an idea in order to reduce food waste that targeted this exact problem. Now I have up on the screen here the exact paragraph on what she sent me, but she basically wanted to create an application where you could search for specific ingredients, and then based off of that search, you would pull up a list of recipes that included or revolved around those ingredients. And then once you get that list, you can filter those options for vegan only or vegetarian only. And once she came to me with the solution to the problem, it was actually over last summer, and I immediately thought that this would be a very good project to do my senior thesis on. And there's a couple different reasons why this would be a very good project to do. Because I knew it would have been as close to a real life experience I could get as a independent contractor, where a client would approach me with a problem, and then I would work together with the client in order to come up with a solution that'll meet their needs. And then another reason is because Emily and I are both heavily involved in the music department here, actually. So we see each other almost every day. So I was able to constantly show her the different iterations of the application and just bounce ideas off each other, which was really nice. And that is how my application, Ingredient Manager, was born. So now I had multiple steps to my approach for this project, and I'm going to go over 5 of them now. The very first thing you need to do is research Xamarin Forms. I'm going to go into detail on what Xamarin Forms is later on, but basically that's the main technology that I wanted to use for this application that would take it to that next level. And then once I had adequate information on this Xamarin Forms, I knew I was going to need some kind of database to hold all the recipes I was going to list and all the users that I was going to hold to. And the very first database that I decided to use was called SQLite, and that was mainly because that's the database that I had the most familiarity with. I just got out of a database class with Professor Mahoney, and that was the main database that we used during that class. So I was like, let's just go with what we know, right? Because I knew there were going to be a lot of things in this project that I did not know. So as I kept working on it in my head about using SQLite, I came to the realization that a relational database is not what I needed. What I actually needed was a non-relational database. So no longer could use SQLite. So then I went back to using something that I know, right? And the only non-relational database that we went over during that class was MongoDB. I knew how it all worked. I knew it was non-relational. Great. So as I began trying to implement MongoDB into my application, I quickly came to realize that you are very limited in the databases you can use with Xamarin. And that's mainly because it's a very new technology. It takes a lot of time to integrate all these different things with Xamarin. So at this moment, you cannot use MongoDB with Xamarin. So those were the only two databases that I knew. So now this is when I needed to begin researching databases, all of that I've never heard of before. The only thing I knew is that I knew it needed to be non-relational, and I knew that it needed to work with Xamarin Forms. And one of the only databases that met both those requirements was a database called LightDB. And even that is not the last database that is going to be implemented once this project is 100% done. And I'll explain why later on. So once I decided what database I was going to use, I decided to make a separate project for my thesis. And that kind of project is normally known as a CRUD project, which means a create, retrieve, update, and delete. So that basically means everything that I knew I was going to need to do with my database, especially because I never used it before. All of the syntax is completely different. And of course, I had to remake this application every single time that I chose a different database. So once I had my CRUD operation running for LightDB, that's when I could actually begin making the UI of my application. And the very first goal that I had for the UI was to just make something that worked, right? I wanted it to do everything that I needed it to do, but none of like the stylistic or fancy things. Once I got everything working for the UI, then I could move on to adding those things for however much time I had left. And of course, while I was making the bare bones version of the UI, I made sure to go in the behind code and add in functionality for the UI whenever I was able to. And once I got the bare bones version of the UI done, the main way that I was able to add those stylistic aspects to UI was to actually hand out my application at that time to a lot of my friends and basically anyone except me, because as most of you know, you have a specific bias to projects that you yourself have made, and getting someone else's perspective on it definitely helps you a lot. So now, what I mentioned before, the first step in my approach was research. This is Amarin forms, and like I said before, it's a very new technology, and with that, it definitely comes with its benefits and its drawbacks. The two main benefits of Amarin is that it transforms one C# application into the native languages of the three major mobile platforms, which is a Windows Phone, not really anymore, but Windows, Android, and iOS. So for me, that was extremely valuable because I had little to no experience in mobile development before this project, which leads me to the next benefit. Is it's based on an MVC.NET framework, which means that if you're like me and you have a lot more web development experience as opposed to mobile, you can draw on a lot of that knowledge I do gain from developing a web and use that same knowledge when making a mobile application in Xamarin. Now on to the bad. Like I said before, it takes a while to integrate different kinds of software into Xamarin. So as of now, you can only use one front-end language, and that's XAML, and one back-end language, which is C#. Now the back-end language being C# wasn't as bad because even though I had never used C# leading up to this project, it very quickly became my favorite language to work in. But XAML, on the other hand, yikes. That's all I gotta say about XAML. I'll go more into that later, but for me, that was definitely a drawback to using Xamarin. Another drawback is you're only allowed to use one IDE with Xamarin, and that's Visual Studio. Now, for some people, that might be the main IDE that you always use, so it's not a drawback, but for me, I prefer an IDE that's more lightweight than Visual Studio, so having to get reacclimated to using Visual Studio was very exciting. Not really. And then lastly, I've mentioned this multiple times, but Xamarin is a very new and unrefined technology, so there are many different bugs in Xamarin, and they're even well-known bugs. Some of the bugs have been reported multiple years ago even, and they're still unsolved, which is not the best. So now we're going to go into the demonstration in my application. We're going to use the Android emulator for this. Now this is the main login page that you see right when you launch the app for the very first time. There is a sign-up page. Not going to go over this because it's just your usual stuff. We're going to use an account that is already made, and it happens to be mine. So this is the first page you see. Once you log in, it's a recipe search page. As you see, I decided to go with the tabbed app approach to this. Right in the beginning of the semester, I knew that's the kind of format that I wanted for my application. And it's really cool because with this being a touch screen laptop, you can slide to the left and the right to go to the different tabs. You have your saved recipes. Right now, I don't have any saved recipes. Recipes that you've made, and then we're back to the recipe search page. Now, you can add as many ingredient boxes as you want. This is to add one ingredient each to each box in order to do your search. Now, I've already populated the database with a couple different recipes, and just for this demonstration purposes, they all have an ingredient called recipe, just so that I could get all of them to show up on one search. And of course, if there's nothing in the entry when you search, it'll just not read those in. So these are some example recipes. See, Emily actually has her own account. You can click on each recipe. It'll go to a detailed view. Then I have a little label up here that says the author of the recipe. So this is a detailed view, and then at the bottom here, there's a button, so you can add this to your saved recipes. So you can just click on this, and then it'll say it's in your saved recipes, just to make sure that actually worked. It's right there. And you can delete any recipe from your saved recipes that you want, but it does not delete from the actual recipe into database, which is good. So you can hit the delete button and it's not there, but if you go back to the page, it's still there. Glorious. All right, so now there are two filter buttons up here. You can filter for vegan-only recipes and vegetarian-only recipes. So as you see, I have a Jordan's meat recipe right here because I love meat. So obviously, if you hit the vegan filter, vegetarian filter, this recipe will not be there for either one of those. The vegan filter, only the vegan recipes, only recipes that match the vegan requirement are listed, and you can do both filters at once. So then only the vegan and the vegetarian filters, the only recipes will be there, just to make sure this is correct. Is it vegan? Yes. Is it vegetarian? Also yes. So that's the recipe search page and the My Recipes page, the My Saved Recipes. Now, last one is the My Recipes. Now, this is all the recipes that you yourself have made. So for demonstration, we're just going to make a new one real quick. We're not going to change too much. I already have default values in here, say 5 minutes, and we'll make it vegan. Why not? So, and then you hit save, and it shows up. Now let's say that you made additions to your recipe, and you're also able, well, let's say you are no longer a vegan, and you want to completely add as much possible meat to this recipe that you humanly can. Then you hit the add-in button, and definitely want to say that it's not vegan anymore. So you hit that, and then you hit the save button, and it's still there just to make sure that actually worked. Is it vegan? It is definitely not vegan. All right, and then the delete button works the exact same as the My Saved Recipes, except when you delete it from the recipes that you have made, this will delete it on the database, because that just makes logical sense. Now we're going to do another check real quick. We're going to add this to the saved recipes just to make sure that worked. It's right there. Now we're going to delete it from the recipes that you made. Uh-oh. Let's see if this actually works. So we deleted it. If we go back, it'll no longer be in this list, and the My Saved Recipes, it's no longer there either. So the app will not just combust into flames if you ever do that, which is a good thing. And then there's a logout button, and then you can re-log into a different user. So that's the demonstration of the overall application. Now, like I said before, because I'm using Xamarin, this application will work on Android, iOS, and Windows. And the majority of the application looks exactly the same, which is what you would usually want, except for the small use cases where there is a common practice on Android that is different from the common practice, let's say, for example, on iOS. With the power of Xamarin Forms, when it translates my C# code into native language, it'll automatically convert my code into the common practices of an iOS application. And to demonstrate that, I have two different screenshots here of me running the iOS application. This is the regular login page. It looks exactly the same as an Android. So what you normally want. Now, if you remember back in the demo, I had the tabs up at the top of the screen. That's because for an Android phone, that is the common practice. If you have any kind of tabs on an Android application, it'll be at the top. But it's actually different if you run it on an iOS application. The common practice is to have that tab format at the bottom of the screen. And as you can see from this next screenshot, you still have the name of the specific tab that you're on, except the tabs are at the bottom of the screen. And that was in no part to me. I didn't have to write any extra code to do that at all. I just ran the application in Android and iOS, and it made that change all on its own, which is very neat. Now, the various bumps, boulders, and giant caverns of despair that I encountered while developing this mobile application. Like I said before, I listed XAML as one of the drawbacks of Xamarin Forms, and that's not necessarily because of Xamarin, but more because of me. It was just completely different for unknown language that I'd ever used before, so I kind of had to rewire my brain on how front-end pages worked in order to use XAML to the best of its ability. And I touched on this briefly before, but Xamarin does still have a lot of bugs. And actually, in the beginning of this year, while I was developing the application, I came across a very nasty bug that wouldn't even let me compile my project at all. And you know, when you go to the error list and you click on the error, it usually brings you to it. It was like so deep within Xamarin itself where the error was happening that there's no way I can make any changes to that. So I eventually just had to remake the whole application and just hope that that same bug did not happen again. And as of now, it has not. So awesome. And the main issue that I ran into while doing this is that iOS applications must be run on a Mac OS machine. And as you can see, this is not a Mac OS machine. So what I ended up having to do was all throughout the year contact any human being on this earth that has a Mac machine that will let me use it for like an hour every now and then, and hopefully they have enough room as well, because you need to install some things as well. But so that was definitely a pain, because I would only have half an hour, and then they're like, all right, man, I really gotta head out, whatever. I was like, oh gosh. So that was fun. Because of this, I did the majority of the development on my Android application. Now, this application is not done. It'll probably never be done, just because there's always something else that you can add to it to make it just that much more better. But some of the things I have listed here, the very first thing I definitely need to do is move the database to the cloud, and this is in reference to me saying earlier that LightDB is not the database I'm going to end up using, because that is a local database, and it works perfectly fine for it being a local database. The problem is that if you have this app on two different phones, if you make a change on one phone, that change will not appear on the different phone. That's the main benefit of having a cloud-based database. And then, as I said before, when I was making this UI, I did the bare bones, make everything work, and then add things on afterwards. I definitely need to add on more things to really give it a modern look. One thing that I have in my head already that I'm going to implement soon is in the recipe detail page to have, let's say, for example, a picture of the recipe in like the top left-hand corner that you can add. It'll just access the photos from your camera, and you could choose whatever one you want. I think that would be really neat. Next is the user functionality and the friendliness. I think that's mainly just me handing out my application to more people than I already have, just to get different views and different perspectives on it. Next one is to improve on the query that I'm using to pull up the recipes off of a search. The one that I came up with now definitely works, but it could be a lot better. Some of the things that I've come up with that can make it better is maybe order the recipes based on percent match, so that if you look at a recipe, it'll pull up the recipe that has the most ingredients that you search for, so that you don't have to buy any extra ingredients in order to make this recipe. You can use all the ones that you already have. And the next one I'm really excited about. Once I move the database to the cloud, I actually had a very cool opportunity to make a web version of this application in a class I took this last January. Obviously, this one needs a lot more work because I had 1 year to write this, whereas the web version I had like 2 weeks, I think, somewhere around there. So it uses a completely different database and a lot of other things that I need to change, but I do think it's possible to make both of them use the exact same cloud database, so that I'd have a mobile and the web version of this application. And lastly, I really need to get a Mac. If I intend to use Xamarin or mobile development in the future, I refuse to use someone else's Mac any longer. So if that is what I end up doing after this, that's the very first thing that I am going to do. Now, looking back on this last year and me developing this project, I definitely improved my problem solving and research skills, because there were so many aspects of this project that I have never encountered before. I never written code in C# before. I've never used Xamarin, never used XAML, never used LightDB. The list goes on and on. So I do an incredible amount of research into this project, and in doing so, I feel like my research skills improved tremendously. The next one is building a large full stack per object. The majority of the web and mobile development jobs that are out there after graduation, usually there are some cases where it's not, but most of it is you're either a front-end developer only or a back-end developer only. So having this experience doing both of those, it really let me know which one I wanted to specialize in, and even though I probably will specialize in one, it's still very good to have a base knowledge of the other half of it as well. So that was also very, very, very good. And the next one, modern mobile development technology. A lot of what recruiters are looking for nowadays is applicants that have experience with something new, something that hasn't been used that greatly yet, so that you can come in with this new knowledge and you can show that you are able to grasp a lot of this new and modern technology that is coming out. And lastly, the majority of the development of this application was in very large chunks of time. I would just get this urge to begin writing code, and then I would go until either I can't go anymore or I just pass out, right? So even if this urge came at like midnight or 1 o'clock in the morning, that's what I would do. So obviously there are some problems to that. Like I said, even if it is at midnight, I'd be coding for like 6 hours, and all of a sudden it's 7 a.m. in the morning, and you have Professor Kowalowitz's comp org class in like 2 hours, and then you end up going to his class with having zero sleep whatsoever. That actually happened more than once. I apologize, but learning from this, definitely, even if you do have that urge, I have come to realize that stopping writing code after 1 or 2 hours, not because you literally can't go on anymore, but because you just want to, and you know that once you come back to it, you're not at a part where you just have to sit there debugging for hours on end. You can jump right back in and begin writing more code with a completely rejuvenated and refreshed mind. Was really nice. I really did think for a while that those long coding hours was what worked for me, but after doing a project as large as this, no. So 1 to 2 hours sessions over the larger ones. And with that, I will take any questions. Yeah.
So it seems like Xamarin covers a lot of bases, Windows, or iOS, and then Android as well.
Mm-hmm.
You said that the C# library that you could use, though, was kind of limited.
Mm-hmm.
You kind of had to work on all those different platforms.
Exactly.
How limited was it? Or was there like a list on the Xamarin forums that said this is what you can use in C#, or how was that laid out?
Yeah, so when you do write a Xamarin project, you actually have 4 separate projects. You have the main one that gets translated into the 3 different platforms, but you also have an Android, iOS, and a Windows, and that's where you can write the specific language of that platform in those projects. And about 90% of the code you need to write will be in that main one. The only thing that I need to write in each of those specific ones was where to store the database, because that's different on each of the different pool ad forms. But there is a list of the different things you can use. There are different names. Most of them are more general names, but it'll translate it into that more specific version once it brings it over to the actual platform. Yeah. Any other questions? Yeah.
You're pretty adamant about using a non-relational database.
Yes.
I'm wondering why. What did you gain by using a non-relational database?
Mm-hmm. So when I first began using a relational database, I was like writing it all out on paper, right? And then I realized that I would have needed to have a complete collection of all of the different ingredients that could have possibly been used, and just going through it in my mind. It's not something I wanted to undertake, because each recipe can have one ingredient. It could have 100 different ingredients of all different kinds of ingredients. So using a non-relational database, I could just have one collection of a recipe, and then have an attribute of that recipe be a list of ingredients. And to me, that seemed a lot easier, seemed more practical as well.
So simplified the whole database design significantly.
Exactly, yes. Any other questions? All right.
Excellent.